Welcome everybody to this edition of Beers with Bill. It is my great pleasure to welcome Matt back from Reverence Brewing and Brawley Brew Company. Matt, welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. So we're going to start with Still Nights. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about this beer?
Yeah, sure. So Still Nights is the second lager that we ever made. I'm a very, very big fan of lagers. Like I brew all these crazy stouts and sours and whatnot, but I am a lager and saison man at heart. That's what I love to enjoy. We brewed the first batch of it during tail end of 2020. We're like, 500-liter batch. It's not a huge batch of beer, but it's not a super popular style. So they'll probably last us. Ended up being wrong. Had to make it a second batch about 2 weeks later. And then we retired it last spring and brought it back this fall. It's based off of what originally was a homebrew recipe. It's obviously evolved since then. But yeah, it's kind of a favorite around the brewery whenever it's cold out. Something I think we'll be bringing back annually.
Now, I'm curious because you start out as a home brewer. How does a beer evolve from a homebrew recipe to like a commercial run?
So one of the big things that changes and this is going to be dependent on, who's home brewing. But a big thing, of course, is temperature control for your yeast, things that we don't really talk about, right? We glamorize different strains of yeast, hops, malt, process, but no one really talks about making sure that the yeast is happy. So one of the big things is once we got glycol jacketed tanks that we can control by 0.1 degrees Celsius, is it was nice that we could really hone in and really get a nice neutral character out of the lager yeast we were working with. So that was probably the biggest change, is just being able to properly handle the yeast. It's a living being, right? So you got to sort of handle it as best you can. And the better you do, typically the better product you get.
I hear you on that. Every one of them has their own individuality and a temperature that they love to work at.
Oh, yes. I mean, you have some stuff that's super finicky. Lagers are one of those. As I'm sure many of you know, they take about twice the time as a typical ale strain. They like to be rather cold. Then on the opposite end of things, you got something like Kvike that it's like it'll ferment at like 42 Celsius, some of the strains, almost to the point that proteins are breaking down and it can't function anymore. But it's happy as can be at those temperatures.
Sure. Mike's curious, how tightly do you actually hold your temperature range?
We hold within 0.3 Celsius.
That's pretty tight.
Yeah. So like if the yeast that we work with in this has a range of about 11 to 15 Celsius is where it's happy. So we'll hold it right at 11 for the first about a week. And then we'll ramp up about a degree every day after that. Or as we see fermentation starting to slow, we'll let it warm up a little bit and continue to attenuate and dry out.
Okay.
So yeah, pretty precise with what we do on those. It's nice to have quality equipment for that.
That's true. It's a big change from being a homebrew to doing what you're doing now.
Oh yeah, when I was homebrewing, it was just like, oh, temperature control. That's going to be like triple the cost of what I've already invested in everything. So I just worked with yeast strains that would work within what I had around me.
Yeah.
So at the time that's how I got really big into doing saisons, because that yeast is kind of bulletproof. The specific strain that we work with, I actually harvested in 2015 off of a very sad looking blackberry when I was out berry picking to make some jam. I just saw a sad looking one and I'm like, oh, but there's yeast on there, and sort of flicked it into a sterile tube that I had. Had some medium in there for it to ferment, and it took off, got it isolated at Escarpment Labs in Guelph. And I've been using it ever since. It's a bulletproof yeast, and it's native, which is kind of cool.
That is kind of cool.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that yeast when we get down here later tonight.
Okay.
But yeah, other things about Still Nights. It's one of the beers I love whenever someone comes in and they're like, oh, I like easygoing beers. I don't like much dark stuff. If I can convince someone to try something that's darker, this is just perfect because it's so neutral. It's so easygoing. There's a little bit of that roast, but it's nothing big and bold like where we're going to be headed next. This is a heavy hitter. It's super sessionable. It's warming. It's kind of everything I like about beer and cold weather mixed together.
I hear you on that. So is there a particular malt strain you're using to get the color into it?
Yeah, so we use 3 different malts in Still Nights, 2 of which are the same as what we use in Germain, which is our Czech grown and Czech floor malted Pilsner. Comes from a rather small maltster. Instead of the lot codes being printed on the bag, it's a like flimsy piece of paper stapled and then shipped across the Atlantic. And it's like the size of a business card. And that's our lot analysis. There's like no English on it. It's like, I don't know what that character over a Z is for. How do I even pronounce this? But we've experimented with a lot of malts, so that's one of our favorites that we use. We then have gone through probably 10 different Munich malts and figured out our favorite. This is a German one that comes from Irex. And then the color that we use a debittered black malt. This batch actually has 2 different types of it just because we were killing off a bag that we had a partial of and then combined it with another. But typically if it's like dehusked or debittered, you take a lot of the astringent aspects of barley out of it. You don't get quite as aggressive of a roast. You get a little smoother. So like if you have husk, you might have something that's intense like espresso, but if it's a dehusked malt, it might be a little more like a blonde coffee, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. I was actually going to ask you what you meant by a debittered malt, so that's a great explanation.
Yeah. There is also Vireman. They make a product called Cinnamar, which is they make a liquid malt extract out of this black malt. And I know some breweries do that because literally you can just dose as needed. We haven't used it just because obviously it's a little more expensive because it's been processed, but yeah, that's kind of how you can get easygoing darker beers. And if you look real carefully at this in the light, I probably can't see it on my camera here, around the edges, you'll actually see it's more of like a dark chestnut. It's not quite black.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah. If we're getting geeky and technical, this is something I think like a 25 on the SRM scale. And
you get as geeky and technical as you want with us, okay?
Yeah, doesn't matter if no one understands. It'll be fun anyways.
I don't understand it. I will ask you.
Fair enough. But yeah, this is just kind of a favorite of mine. It's got enough flavor to keep me interested in thinking about the beer. But then if you get it inside from shoveling and you're exhausted, so it's like, I need something that I'm just going to crush and kind of enjoy. And this just fits the bill for me.
I hear you on that. So you've mentioned Germain, right?
Correct.
Germain's making its way to the LCBO in the near future?
It is. I'm just waiting on labels to arrive as we redid the label, did a custom shape and everything for it. Then I have to put that on a can. Then that can has to go to the LCBO. They do the lab testing, which is just silly. They test for like arsenic and whatnot in there. It's like, guess how many beers have ever had arsenic in them? This many. But yeah, once it passes that, we're pretty much ready to go. So we're really, really lucky. And it might be like 2 weeks from LCBO shelf. More realistically, before summer is kind of what we're hoping for.
Sure. It's kind of a bit of a coup for you to get that in there.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty excited to have that. We had 2 beers go on to the next stage of tasting, one of which was Germain, which is now moving to the final stage. The other was Seabreeze. They decided they're only going to take one product just to start with us. So they ended up going with the lager, which I'm really excited about because the LCBO is pretty flooded with IPAs and there's not enough high-end craft lagers.
Yeah, that's it. That does put you into a unique position there, especially moving into the summer.
Oh yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love an IPA and all, but there's nothing better. Saison might be able to compete with a lager. It depends. But like lager is just the king of beer. It's what everyone knows and it's what they think of when they think beer, right? So pretty excited there.
Well, congratulations. I hope everything works out well with that.
Thank you. Likewise, fingers crossed. I'm going to put my Still Nights off to the side. I'll probably come and revisit that afterwards.
Okay.
We'll go to something a little more extreme here. So this is Inkless, our bourbon barrel aged pastry stout made with tons and tons of Madagascar vanilla beans. There's over, I think it's 1.75 grams for every liter of actual like vanilla bean, which, if you know much about vanilla, is a ton.
That's a lot of vanilla bean in there. Yes.
Oh yes, that was one of the best smelling days around the brewery when we were filling the barrel with all those beans. So when you pour this, you should definitely see it's got a pretty thin head on it. The bubbles take a long time to rise as well. This has got some serious viscosity to it. Inkless was the first stout that we ever did when we launched back in 2020. In June, we had this. It was kind of a favorite. People really liked it. So we decided to bring it back. Did a few changes, gave it a little more body because you can never have enough body in a stout, apparently. But yeah, 14%. This is not a small beer. This hits pretty hard. This is probably all I'll end up having from the can tonight, just because I have to be productive tomorrow.
I hear you on that, because it's going to drink easy too, right?
Well, that's kind of what we've designed. Like, we've had people that have come in, split a can with someone in the tap room, and they're like, "Oh, that was good. Maybe we should get another one." And I'm like, "Oh, just so you know, it's 14%," and the jaws just drop.
Yeah.
People are like, "That's 14." Well, that's what happens when you have a nice sweet beer. Covers up that alcohol really well. Oh, so much vanilla. That was aged in a Booker's bourbon barrel as well, which first time, well, this is the first beer from that lot of barrels that we got in. Definitely going to be ordering more of those. Just beautiful, beautiful bourbon character on it.
Yes, I get that in there. But I'm also such a vanilla fan that that's the primary tone coming through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as long as there have been stouts that people have been throwing weird things into it, vanilla has always existed. It's kind of like that classic, right? We've put bananas in stout, we put coconut in stout, but vanilla is something that always is my favorite.
Derek's curious how you get away with 14% beer.
It's in November. The LCBO changed, or the AGCO changed something, and it seemed like every brewery, when we were sort of all its brewers tend to talk amongst each other.
Yeah.
The wording was kind of vague and it no longer had the cap of 11.9. So we're like, oh, let's do that. I mean, I'll let you all in on a secret. Most of our stouts were a little stronger than 11.9 to begin with, but we couldn't label it there, just because at that 14, that's typically the alcohol point that the yeast will die off, so we'll never have a cross contamination or something like that. But yeah, started making them bigger, and we were watching other breweries. Bellwoods was a really great example. They're huge. They've been doing those double barrel stouts, and we've been watching them for over a year, and they were all in the 14s, and like, they haven't got their wrists slapped. We probably won't get ours slapped.
Yeah, they have to make an example of everybody. Sorry, Derek.
Were they labeling as 14, or were they doing the classic, call it 11.9 and just?
They were actually labeling it in the like 13s and 14s.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, though, one of their Instagram reels, they had like an artistic rendering of their logo and whatnot. It's like, all the moving pieces. And on that Instagram reel, it said 11.9. And then on the actual labels, it was like the 14 point whatever. So I was like, interesting. But yeah, we've noticed a lot of breweries have started labeling higher. I think Barncat just had one that was in the 16s, which is just astronomically monstrous.
So it's a little bit more challenging once you get, like you said, above 12%, because you have that impact on the yeast. So how do you pull that off?
Working with a yeast strain that kind of doesn't care what we do to it. It's a pretty atypical for the style. I kind of stumbled across this during the homebrewing days. I'm like, that worked really well. It was, meaning to make a 12% stout, realized that I didn't buy the yeast, and it's like, well, what do I have kicking around? So threw something else in there and said, well, I've already made the wort, so it's either going to go down the drain or But yeah, we found one that doesn't need a ton of nutrients. It does well in high acid environments because, as we all know, beer is acidic, high and high ethanol environments, and is just a monster at chewing through barley, which it does. One of the first times that we brewed these stouts, we put 400 liters into our 500-liter fermenters, and came in the next day to, like, I kid you not, like 2,000 square feet of the brewery just covered in beer from it overflowing from the fermentation.
Oh, wow. That
Oh,
would be, how long
mhm.
did it take to get that cleaned up?
The best part was it was on a Thursday, so I came in the Friday morning to open up for tap room. Well, actually, it was just bottles to go. That was second or third lockdown, whenever that was.
Yeah.
But it was just like, oh, I think it took Brett manned the front, and I think it took me 6 hours to get that cleaned up.
Oh, wow. That
Yeah.
would be a nice sticky mess to clean.
Oh, it was not fun because it's semi-fermented, so it was even stickier than this is now. So yeah, learning curve right there. So we've started using a defoamer in the fermentation now. So usually we use it when we're boiling, because right before it starts to boil, we have what's called the hot break. All the protein stuff coagulate together and they'll like to come flying out of the kettle. It's really exciting when boiling liquid's going everywhere. Anyways, we started using a little bit of that in the fermenter, maybe like half a milliliter kind of thing. And that's been keeping it a little more calm and well behaved.
It's not like you can set it in the corner when it's bad, is it?
Oh no, I tried that and then I wound up cleaning floors for 6 hours. Kind of sucked.
Derek's curious, now that we're starting to hit the 16% stuff, how long before someone starts doing a sextuple or a quint in IPAs?
I hope never. I'm a big fan.
Matt, I need to unmute you. I hit a button wrong.
There we go.
Thank you.
I hope never. I personally kind of cut it off at double IPA. I've had a few triple IPAs I've liked, specifically Halo from Willibald to me was one of the best. Probably because it was a triple IPA, but I thought I was drinking a double IPA. It just was that easy going. I've never liked any of the quadruple IPAs. I find they just get a little too harsh and weird at that point.
Yeah. Mike's curious about your pitch rate on this beer.
For yeast? Or?
That's a good question. Mike, maybe you should ask it.
Yeast, I see. You wouldn't believe it. This is a homebrew pack that I just put in like a 4-liter flask and add a few cups of dry malt extract to and just let her rip for about 3 days before I ferment it. It's very, very lazy, but it's just how it works. It's one of those magical things.
Yeah, it's like that yeast is a beast. Okay.
Oh, it is. I'm not scared of anything as much as I am of that yeast in the brewery, because I just know it'll cause me issues if I don't treat it right.
Yeah, proved that day one, didn't it?
Oh man, we've had other issues. Like we did a barley wine that was one of the beers we launched with, brewed with the same yeast and big sticky beer similar to our stouts. And we ended up naming it Cannon because it was aged in a rum barrel. And rum producers are famous for just like, you'll have those solid wooden bungs in the barrel. Instead of taking them out to empty it, they'll just smash it into the barrel and then tip it over and drain it. Anyways, some of those bungs, when it was fermenting a bit, plugged back up the bung hole. The next day I come in and there was just, oh my goodness. Like I think it was 28 feet we measured with a tape measure away from the barrel, some of the splatter. If you enter the tap room, you'll see some that the chalk is washed off with what looks like rain. No, that's barley wine from years before. Yeah. We've had a few mishaps that are a little fun, and cleaning is just not my favorite thing to do.
No, I can imagine. And I've been in the tap room in the barrel area. That would be a nightmare to clean.
Oh yes. We have started only if a barrel is fermenting, it sits on the floor drain and does not move until it's done making a mess. Learn that the hard way.
Now the industry's going through some price changes. how are you managing that? Or
About as
should I
well
say
as
not
well.
prices, cost changes?
Yeah. We set ourselves up pretty well at the beginning with Duimering, because like we're like, this is going to be our first flagship. So we're going to price it a little higher than what it is now because it gives us wiggle room. But we just got 2 malt increases in 6 months. Usually we get maybe 1 a year if we're lucky. These 2 have been major. I think most of our grain has gone up about 15% if you're lucky, closer to 20 to 25% on most stuff. Yeast has a slight increase. Escarpment Labs has been great throughout the pandemic with delaying increases as much as possible. And hops, though, those are really stable. So, yeah, a lot of costs for beer production is going up. You know, there's this aluminum shortage looming. So cans are going to become scarce probably again and all that fun stuff. But yeah, we'll probably have to see, unfortunately, a few increases this year, I think, across the board for beer, which sucks because beer's already expensive as is. But not much you can do about that.
Yeah. The thing is everybody across the board's facing the same increase.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just no one wants to be the first one to put the price increase out to, you know, the beer drinking public because they'll be the first ones that get slammed. But it's going to happen pretty soon, I think.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a little bump.
Yeah. Can well imagine. It's not been fun. So when it comes to cans, do you book cans far ahead or are you on an as needed basis?
We try and keep like a 2-month supply of cans just left like just around.
Mhm.
Just because when we first started canning last March, I think it was last March. That was when the aluminum can shortage was kind of starting. And just since then, can prices have gone up a little bit, not crazy. But yeah, we just keep a little extra on hand because you never know when you're not going to be able to get cans again. And if we can't get cans, a small brewery down the road like Rhythm and Brews, they probably can't get cans, so they don't have any to sell us then. So yeah, everyone's sort of hoarding a little bit right now, I think.
Can well imagine. Do all of the sort of micros in the area work together on can order or?
Not really. However, like I know we've been like looking at a canning run and be like, oh, we're gonna be like, 15 blank cardboard trays short for putting the cans in. And I mean, Barn Cat's called us up, we've helped them out. Rhythm and Brews has called us up, we've helped them out. They've helped us out. Like everyone kind of helps each other when they can. But yeah, unfortunately, no one's really been able to go in on an order on cans just because most of us get them from BSG and they just charge shipping regardless. It doesn't matter if it's going to a similar place.
Okay. So the BSG is actually sort of consolidating the orders anyways then.
Yeah, and they got one of the best price points and they're in Guelph. So every so often we'll actually just go and pick them up and save a couple bucks on shipping.
Okay. Derek's curious. You don't have to answer this because you might not even be able to answer this, but sort of across the industry, what's sort of the average profit margin on a can of beer right now?
Depends what you call profit margin. I've seen a lot of different pricing models for how to make a beer. Like some people will be like, take the cost of your grain and times it by 15, and that should make up for your yeast and overhead and whatnot. That one I think is confusing. Some people say go with the standard restaurant model of if my raw ingredients cost me, $1, I'm going to charge $3 for it. But there's no real standard. Like IPAs, specifically those big hazy double IPAs, those profit margins are trash. Like we made a batch and I think we made 6% profit off of it, which is next to nothing.
Yeah.
But that's just because the hops are expensive to begin with. Every bag that we're adding is absorbing like 80 liters of beer. I can't claim it back. So it honestly, it really depends on what the beer is. We try and get away with sort of like a 3X model that if my hops, yeast, and malt cost me, and packaging cost me $1, let's say, I'm going to charge $3, and I'm hoping that that's then going to cover my water, my electricity, my labor, and my rent kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
all the other costs in there.
Yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, I can't honestly say what the average margin is because every beer has different tasks that need to be done to it, right? this inkless, this big stout, Monster Brew Day takes a lot longer for us to get through this because we boil this for 3 hours instead of our standard 1 hour, or if it's a lager, to 90-minute. Then you have going into a stainless tank, letting it ferment. Then it's coming out of the stainless tank, going into barrels. You're cleaning that stainless tank, staying in barrels. You're adding adjuncts to those barrels. Then those barrels are moving to another tank. Then you package off that tank. So like there's a lot of processes that change up if you're going from a lager that ferments and carbonates in the same tank, or a big barrel aged stout that moves from vessel to vessel.
In the grand scheme of things, like, I mean, obviously this is $12.50 a can, and for good reason, because it's a shit ton of work and a shit ton of material and everything.
Yeah.
Are
That's mainly
you gonna generally make more money per can on this or on a lager? Like, are lagers kind of an inflated cost, or
not really. I think
it kind of evens out over time?
It kind of evens out over time. The only one that's like really, really bad is like big IPAs that you lose to hop absorption. And IPAs, like, they're not like a stout, right? You can get a barrel aged stout for like $6-7 from some breweries. You can get a barrel aged stout for, I've seen $25, I think is the highest I've seen for a single bottle. So there's a lot more variance kind of in there, where lager is kind of set in stone, right? You have to use a specific amount of malts to get to your 5%. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around that. You can't hop it too much because it gets too bitter, and more hops mean more haze. So we usually try and stay away from that. And yeast is a pretty fixed cost as well. So the only room for lagers to become more expensive is, okay, am I getting the cheapest Pilsner malt available to me that's like, $32 a bag, or am I going and getting quality floor malted stuff that's almost $60 a bag? I think we're up to 59 now on the one that we use. So that's
I'm more curious. Sorry, Matt. I'm more curious what you do with the vanilla bean when you're done.
Usually they end up getting cleaned out and going down the drain just because they're in the bottom of barrel and it's not easy to harvest out of there. We've tried doing second use and it's like, I don't really get much in there. Then we've had other ones that like we rinse the barrel out and it's like, oh, beans are still in there. Well, it was rinsed with boiling, so throw more beer and it's sanitized.
Okay, so I'm just curious. I would love to try the vanilla bean out of a bourbon barrel in the stout in an ice cream, making an ice cream with it sometime.
That would probably be good. We actually had a customer our first summer that took our maple syrup, maple bourbon barrel stout. They made a reduction out of it and they brought in like a tiramisu that had like that reduction on it.
Oh, wow.
Like, oh, here's another beer. That was good. Great dessert. Like, it was amazing. So we've every so often someone will come in and do some neat cooking stuff with our beer, and we'd love to see what people are doing with that. And like, that's not a cheap cooking ingredient either. Like at 12,
no, and not on a reduction either.
No. I mean, it smells so good just when you're pouring it out. It'd be hard to do anything else other than just want to sip it.
But then again, when you're doing a reduction, you want to use top quality, high-end ingredients.
That's true. And these pastry stouts are great. They're full of sugar, so it will reduce and get sticky and delicious. Probably caramelize a bit more as well while you're reducing it.
Derek's, it's fantastically dangerous because it's so good and smooth. Yes.
Oh,
Which one are we going to try next?
I think I'm going to move to the Saison.
I
remember the one time when we were just before we moved there. I'll talk one last bit about this beer. One day we were like, all right, let's taste all the stout barrels that we have in house, which was like 15 or so at the time. And I wasn't thinking, I'm like, I need to go afterwards. I had to call my fiance to come drive me home because I'm like, I don't feel safe leaving the brewery right now.
Yeah, I could see that.
Well, because like even like when we do sensory analysis, it's probably like 1.5 to 2 ounces. So it doesn't seem like much, but all of a sudden you've had 25 to 30 ounces of 14% stout. That will add up real fast. Yeah, and you're probably not doing that on a full stomach either. I try and do it on a full as possible stomach, but usually not eating within 2 hours beforehand, so my palate's a little like more neutral. So now when we do that, I go and get a big old bowl of pasta from the freezer. It's left over, have that for lunch. And then it's like, all right, we'll do barrel tasting in a few hours once I got a full belly.
Wow. So we're going to do the Saison now.
Yeah. Let's see. I went a little under on the carbonation on this one. We don't have a fancy flow meter that's easy to clean. So we don't really know our volume of beer going into a packaging tank. So we don't know exactly the amount of sugar to add for carbonation. Usually I try and get it that after about 5 seconds of the cap being off, it almost wants to start foaming over the bottle. That's where I like my Saisons, real fluffy. Like this was a beer I brewed for myself because I do that every so often.
No,
Yeah, I know.
you own a microbrew and you make beer for yourself?
Not all the time. Maybe 1 out of 10 are for me. This one specifically was one that I brewed for myself. I'm a huge Saison fan, even more so when it's got Brettanomyces or other mixed culture stuff going on. So this uses that wild yeast I was talking about, which is just an absolute monster. This thing it'll ferment about 98% of the sugar within 2 weeks. Most yeast will
Wow.
do about 75, maybe 80%. This thing just wants to go bone dry. So for me, I personally like a Saison that has almost no sugar left in it. I don't want any sweetness. I want it to be dry, refreshing. You might call me weird, but almost pithy. Like, that white stuff on an orange that you
Yeah.
don't really want to have a mouthful of, but every so often a little bit's nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stuff they tell you not to take when you're zesting.
Yeah, exactly. I like a little bit of that kind of flavor. I just find it really refreshing. So this is our standard Saison that we typically do. This is spelt malt, a Belgian grown Pilsner malt, and then a little bit again of our favorite Munich malts that I love to use. Believe it or not, we use 3 different Pilsner malts in house for 3 different uses. Just because even if it's a Pilsner malt, there's some that's like, oh, this tastes like bread crust. Or in this situation, we find this specific Pilsner malt reminds us a little bit of honey, which works well in that Saison kind of vibe.
That's the back end tone. I was trying to identify it. The honey flavor. Yeah.
That's a little bit like a wildflower honey. And there's no honey in this.
No.
But it just has that nice, subtle wildflower kind of honey flavor going on. So dry hopped with Bramling Cross. Dry hop Saisons are my absolute favorite thing to do because everyone loves hoppy beer, pale ales and whatnot. But I really like seeing what those hop compounds and the Brettanomyces do together. It becomes even more tropical, I find. And it's just nice to have a little summer refresher.
I'm supposed to ask you about the Mandela effect of this one.
So our good friends at Barn Cat pointed this one out to me. As you can see, it says Brambling Cross on the label there. I thought it was called Brambling Cross. I have pictures in my head of reading hop lists saying Brambling Cross. It's actually Brambling Cross. It's kind of like Bernstein Bears versus Bernstein Bears. We all remember it differently. Anyways, that got pointed out literally the day we had labeled all the bottles and stuff. And it's like, well, too late.
Yeah, it is, but it makes for a great story.
Oh, yeah. And like literally we've had like 2 people correct us on it. Everyone else is like, yep, that's a thing. That's what that hop is. So I'm glad I'm not alone at least.
It's amazing when the tricks our mind will play on us when we're reading something.
Yeah. And the fact that I've literally said this hop to numerous people and no one ever corrected my enunciation of it either. Brambling Cross, and no one ever corrected me. Probably just thought I was a moron and they didn't want to make me feel bad.
They probably didn't even catch it.
Yeah. Either that or our parallel universe had a shift and I came from the other universe and now we're stuck in this one. Something like that.
You read too much science fiction.
Yeah, I know. Gotta do something with your spare time. It's either that or I'm here having beer with you.
Cheers.
Hmm. But yeah, nice dry hoppy without being that like big juicy hoppy note that we're so used to nowadays. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the hoppy vibes you get out of a West Coast IPA, but then you've got that beautiful fruity, funky Brett note going on behind it. I just love it.
It's quite the complex flavor. Yes.
Hmm. But I find like even though it's complex, like we like to talk about like intensity as like it's a volume dial, right?
Yeah.
Some stuff will go up to 11, even though the 11 doesn't exist. It still gets there. I usually like this. I would say it's not anywhere close to 9 or 10. I think this is like a 4 or 5 on intensity. It's something that I find still refreshing. It's easygoing, but again, similar to my loggers, if I hone in and want to really focus on it, I'll pick up all those delicate little nuances in it.
Yep. Yep. And at the same time, you can just sit and enjoy it.
Exactly. So our first year we did a Heel Melon dry hop Brett Saison. Then the next dry hop Brett Saison was this one with Brownland Cross. I usually like to use hops that are a little less known or stuff that's typically not an IPA hop, but also not like a classic lager hop, sort of an in-betweener.
Yep.
Because you get those fun fruity flavors, you get that herbaceous grassiness as well. That's definitely the one I'm finishing tonight, I can tell you that.
I hear you on that. So I have a curiosity question.
Sure. What's that?
You've done a few interviews. Is there any question that people don't ask you that you wish they would ask you?
Honestly, I don't think so.
Okay.
Like I like interviews like this because it just feels like we're having a conversation back and forth, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I never want someone in a conversation to ask me any specific question, really. Like I just enjoy chatting back and forth.
Okay. No, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
My wife is, every so often says you should talk to your guests and ask, if they've not ever been asked a question that they want to be asked. Because she got that in the library world where they had the guest on and the guy goes, yeah, no one ever asked me what I actually read.
Yeah. I mean, it's no little known secret. Most brewers don't drink the hype beers, right? I know very few brewers who will say their favorite style is a double IPA or a pastry stout. 9 out of 10 are going to tell you it's lager or pale ale.
And then there's Rob, our good friend, who for the longest time brewed only what he wanted to drink.
I mean, he still likes lagers. We play Dungeons and Dragons every week together, and there's lots of lager in that fridge of his.
That's true.
Yeah, it's nice. We do a little potluck once a week, play some D&D, have fun, relax.
Well, that's important, especially when, you work the kind of hours that you actually work.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting to try and get 5 people from the hospitality industry together at the same time.
It does take work, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Mike's curious who your current D&D character is.
So we just finished our last campaign, and this week had our first session of a new campaign that Rob from Short Fingers actually running. It's his first time running a game, so exciting, fun. I ended up doing a completely random player. If you don't know anything about D&D, you can just tune me out for a minute here. But basically, I just rolled the dice. I assigned, a number to each class, the race, backgrounds. And I'm like, I'm going to do something completely random. So I'm playing a Goliath monk who is an entertainer, which is kind of fun and just different.
That's very different.
Yeah. And it's nice to get the escape from this world, go and be in another world for a little bit. And there's no pastry that's making a mess in that world.
Yeah, it's unfortunately my son's not tuned in because he's been a dungeon master D&D a few times. So
it's so much fun. If you get a group of friends together, I cannot recommend a better way to spend an afternoon.
Yep.
Yeah, just get the nerd out and geek out.
That's probably the best way to describe that.
Yeah. And I've got to say, probably 80% of brewers I know, they're really big geeks.
But we won't say that too loud.
Yeah.
Carrie is always curious, and I'm sure I've asked this of you before, but what beer have you tried where your brain has just immediately went, damn, I wish I'd made that one?
Ooh, that's probably a good one. First time that probably happened was 2017. My fiance was like, it was December 2017. I was still working an office job. And she's like, oh, I have 4 days coming off. She's a nurse, so her schedule sometimes has big stretches. She's like, we should go do something. Where could we go on vacation? And I'm like, oh, I'd love to go to Vermont. Just like threw that out as a joke, right? Because it's like, I want to do this. She's probably not going to want to. Amazing breweries down there. She's like, yeah, let's do that. It's like, oh, okay. So we went down to Vermont, got to go and try, the legendary Alchemist. This is a glass from that trip, actually. Got to go to a whole bunch of different ones, but the beer specifically that stood out to me like that was when we went to Hill Farmstead. I was like, I'm here for the wild ales, but I'll try, the other beers that they have. So they had a double IPA, double Citra. I mean, who doesn't like Citra? If you like IPAs, it's sort of that classic flavor. And I remember we got back to the hotel. I'm like, I'm going to crack a can of this. And it was just like, I think it's Train Spotting when they shoot up the heroin and their pupils go big and the life flashes before their eyes with all the greatness. At the first sip, and it was just like kid in the candy shop kind of feeling. I was like, holy cow. I don't know what it is about what they do with their water profile or the yeast that they use, because that's proprietary to them. But it was just one of those beers that I tasted it. I'm like, we have good IPAs in Ontario. That was during the heyday of Bellwoods working on their Milk Shark series. Juicing from Sawdust was out. Barncat was doing their hazies. But you go and try that, and it was life-alteringly different. That was probably one of the best examples of that. And it's not even my favorite style of beer.
Yeah, I know, but sometimes you get surprised, don't you?
Yeah, it was just perfect. I don't think anyone could say they wouldn't like that beer. And it still haunts me because I've gone and I've tried it again. It's not as good as I remember it being previously, but that's just beer for you. The first time is always the most memorable, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
On the note of IPAs, I'm going to dig into our final beer here. Nothing like a blank silver bullet. I had to put stickers on your labels because I can't legally give beer to the public unless it has a label on it that says the alcohol content and where it was brewed.
Yeah.
So we're waiting on labels for this to come in. Just ended up canning it. This is kind of a throwback IPA. It's not full East Coast hazy, juicy beer. We actually took a lot of influence from the West Coast IPA. So there is an actual bittering addition in here. Our salts that we use in our water profile, we changed up not to favor East Coast completely, but it had a little bit of a West Coast flavor to it. Just trying some different processes. And of course, went with a classic hop, Chinook. A lot of people find it a boring hop. I think it really, really shines. Especially in more recent years, the pininess has gone down on it, and it's got a lot more of a sort of tropical citrusy note. I know it's weird to say that that's not a hazy beer anymore, but like I can kind of see my finger on the other side when I wiggle it in front of it. So it's not murky like most double IPAs or something are. I think there's a question down there.
Wanted to know if there's a hop you've always wanted to use in an IPA, but have never had a chance to.
Lotus. We have talked about that around the brewery so much, wanting to use it. Currently, we've just been kind of going through inventory, and we've just started reordering hops for the first time in like 8 months or so. And we're also working through the production schedule of things we want to do. But Lotus is something we really want to work with because it sounds, hazy and juicy, what everyone loves, but it's got some other neat sounding stuff. Like I think lychee was one of the descriptors, and that's a favorite fruit of mine. So yeah, it just sounds the most interesting, and we've all been sort of drooling over the descriptors, being like, we got to figure out something to do with this.
I'm surprised you haven't used Lotus.
We just haven't gotten to it yet. We were thinking about getting it, but we're like, you know what? It sounds great. Let's let some other breweries hype this up, right? Like we've got Third Moon locally that as soon as they get a hop and they make one of their grand slam out of the park beers, that hop all of a sudden everyone wants, but no one really knows about Lotus. So we're hoping that it was going to gain a bit of traction before we tried working with it, because it's not an inexpensive hop either. But
No, it's very unique because not many people grow it.
No, it's fairly new as well. I think it only came on to the commercial scene in like 2019 question mark.
I think you're right. It's 18 or 19.
Yeah, so it's not a super well known one, but it just sounds interesting and kind of like what we want to do with IPAs. But this guy, IPA with a little bit of bitterness, that's exciting
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. I was just saying, I see Mike sitting there shaking his head. Maybe Mike and I should convince you to do a collab with him and I.
And do what?
With Lotus.
It'd be fun. I love trying new things. That's one of the fun things about having a small brewery, a 500 liter system is it's not that much beer. We can experiment with stuff.
That's true.
Yeah. That was one of the things when we were first getting the brewery set up. It's like, okay, what size do we want to go to? 15 hec is kind of that like ideal point. You're big enough that a contract canner will show up for a single tank. It's a pretty reasonable amount of grain for one person to handle for a brew, yada, yada, yada. But it's also a lot of beer, 1,500 liters, right?
Yeah.
So we decided to go a little smaller at the beginning because it's always helpful to be able to do smaller batches. And I think in the grand scheme of things, it helped us hone in on some of our beers a little quicker than if we had something that was bigger.
Can't take as big a risk when it's a bigger batch.
No. And also, if you have an issue with a bigger batch, that's a whole lot more money that goes down the drain.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah. Like our first batch is gone and sold actually already. But I know a lot of breweries, they'll do the secret first batch that no one ever sees. So they'll get the cheapest grain just to see how their conversion goes on it, the cheapest hops just to see how their chiller and everything handles the plugging on it. And then they'll ferment it to see, how does their glycol chiller work? Is it very accurate at keeping the tank in temperature? And they're like, okay, we can get rid of that beer now and we'll brew something that's tasty.
Well, that is probably a wise way to do it.
Yeah.
On a new system. How many batches have you done on yours now?
That's a good question. We've probably done, I want to say we're getting close to brew number 200 because some batches are like double or triple.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Depends on what we're doing. So I know we're on an independent brew of like 170 something, but we have a bunch in there that are double batches or something like that.
So you're starting to get a really good feel for how the system operates.
I almost don't need to look at the temperature settings on it anymore. I just know it feels like it's been this long. It's probably ready to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's slowly becoming an extension of the body.
Well, it does because you do it enough, it starts to become a muscle memory thing.
Oh yeah. So much so that I have to write reminders to myself, take gravity reading at this step, just because it feels so natural. I'm like, why do I need to break what I'm doing?
Well,
there's at least one batch of saison that never got a gravity reading done on it. But it's like, yeah, we've brewed like 30 batches of the same recipe. It's got to be pretty close. Let's average it, guess.
Yeah. But and that's sort of the danger of becoming used to your system. Is you get to the point where you actually know what's going on by the time the feel, what the air movement is around you. It just becomes a whole memory thing.
Oh yeah. And like different noises. We know in our one kettle, if we hit a specific temperature at a very specific volume of like 520 to 530 and about 85 Celsius, if we hold it there just with the elements turned on, it'll actually hit the natural frequency and they'll see the big kettle start to jiggle. It is,
oh no,
nothing bad's ever happened, but like there's raindrops of 85-degree liquid just like bouncing all over the place. It's crazy.
I imagine it would be.
Yeah. And it also has to be a beer that is about 20 Plato starting gravity. So for reference, the big stouts are like 32, lagers are about 12. So it's somewhere just above a double IPA kind of thing. And then all of a sudden we get that magic perfect storm of when things start to go crazy. I also don't brew with music on because I just know the sounds of the brewery as well.
Yeah.
Specifically the bad ones and when I need to go run and fix something.
Yeah, that's very true. You get to learn how something sounds when it's working right, and if it doesn't sound right, you better go do something about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Derek's curious about why the order of beers tonight.
Just kind of what I've been enjoying recently and what other people have been enjoying. But the order specifically, I really like having a hoppy beer right after I've had like a Brett or mixed ferment beer. I don't know why, but my palate just enjoys that. So these two felt like a natural one following the other.
Yep.
And then the dark beers, obviously I wouldn't do Inkless and then go back to the Still Nights because the Still Nights will taste like nothing at that point.
Yeah.
But also, you know, the Saison's bold enough that I can actually stand up to some of these stout flavors. And it's got a bitterness that kind of cuts through it. So the palate refreshes pretty quick.
Okay.
But yeah, it's difficult to order beers. It's one reason why we don't do flights actually at the brewery. It's because, you know, someone will come in and they'll say, oh, I've heard good things about your lager. I'll get, you know, a pour of that. Oh, I'll try that big crazy stout. Oh, a double IPA with fruit. I'll get that too. And now give me the sourest fruited thing you have as well. And I'll try that. And it's no one ever drinks the lager first like they should. It's always the last beer. And they're like, I didn't think the lager was that great. It didn't taste like anything. It's like, you killed your palate.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't do flights at the brewery for that reason specifically. I'm also not a fan of speed dating. I really like to get to know my beer.
I've never heard it described that way, but that's an interesting way to describe that.
I like to get to know it. I don't just want to get a surface idea of it. I can read, you know, the back of most cans to get a surface idea of a beer. I like to actually experience it. And specifically, like when you have a pint, you know, you'll change temperature a little bit. And it's like, oh, that was a little cold at the beginning. Then I hit this nice sweet spot where it tastes different flavors came out.
Totally understand that. I could never drink a full pint of Hoegaarden because as it got warm, the off flavor started to bother me. But I could drink the half, like that big honking thick glass half pint. I could drink that no problem because it's just the right temperature. So.
I had a Hoegaarden for my first time in probably like 3 years this past Sunday when I was gardening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hadn't had one. And then fiance came back from grabbing the last few supplies. She's like, I think we all needed a beer. So I got us these. It's like, oh, nice to revisit a classic that you haven't had in years.
Oh, absolutely. But I always made fun of myself because it was nothing to do with that great big honking glass. It was just, it got warm and I didn't like it anymore.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't any problem with that on Saturday because it was 24 degrees and I was doing all the brute force and ignorance for the gardening. So it was just like, yep, I'll take that. Thank you.
Can well imagine, yes.
Quite refreshing.
Yep. Are you looking forward to patio season?
I'm looking forward to it again, yeah. Not so much as a business, as a person, I'm looking forward to it. As a business, it's one more thing that I have to go and clean and maintain, but I love sitting on a patio on a nice day. I know everyone else does as well, so looking forward to that.
Mike's curious if you're going to keep running the smoker through the summer.
Yep, we're going to start that back up next month, which is creeping up on us pretty soon here.
Yep.
I mean, second anniversary is, actually, I think it's this Sunday is our second anniversary. Let's check that calendar. It is. So the following weekend, we'll be doing a few fun beer releases for that. We'll have something on the smoker going. I think we have a Barn Cat collaboration coming up, 2 different Third Moon collaborations coming up. Some of our Method Traditionale, 2 different versions of that. So Lambic, but not Lambic because we're not in Brussels. So yeah, got some fun stuff sort of coming down the pipeline. Looking forward to doing that and getting the smoker running again because it's nice when people don't buy all this food because I have nice lunches on Mondays.
I hear you in that, yes. So happy anniversary coming up.
Thank you.
So you and Third Moon are really close together then on anniversary dates.
Was the 16th of May. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were like 2 weeks after us. And Bebo and I were chatting back and forth during our startup phase. We were doing the same with Mark from Catalyst. Mark and I were kind of racing each other. We brewed before he did, but he was open to the public before we were. But we were busy filling barrels, so.
Speaking of Mark, he was just on the show.
Yep.
And he did, I have to ask this, he did mention that you guys did a collab together and that you, so first of all, two things. One, you drove that barrel of beer home from Bracebridge. I'm wondering what that drive was like. And he says that you always, when you're there, break something of his.
I don't break anything, but things just tend to break in the presence of me. Like, so I brewed there twice with him now. And the first time we go in, I mill the grain while he's doing the task of getting set up, because milling grain is grunt work. Anyone can do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, my pilot light for my burner is out and no gas is coming through. I can't light it. So he spent like 2 hours trying to fix that. I had nothing to do with it. I hadn't even walked in the brew house yet. And then I can't remember what it was the most recent time when I was there, but something else got buggered. And again, I had nothing to do with it. I was just present. So I don't know, some spirit in his brewery hates me, obviously.
I hate it when you get a poltergeist.
Yeah, seriously.
I really do.
Well, at least it's not in my brewery.
At kickoff, we had a poltergeist. First, the ice machine broke, but didn't break. Then one of the taps refused to pour, but all the other ones still did. So there were 13 taps working, but one didn't.
That's a lucky
and then the next day, that tap was working, but 3 down wasn't working. It's one of those like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's weird. But
what was that drive from Bracebridge like with the 205-liter barrel of beer cruising in the back of your truck?
So it wasn't in the barrel. I had a trailer, but the trailer had our cool ship in it, which is sealable now, so we can travel with it. So we started doing traveling cool shipping, which is kind of fun. Yeah. But usually when I drive, the tank's like full as full can be, right? There's not really much sloshing that can happen. This time it was only half full. Excuse me.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and like I was like right at the capacity that my little truck can handle as well. So like I was riding dirty. The suspension already looked inverted on the thing. And then like anytime I touched the brakes, I could just feel that slosh forward and back. And yeah, I was going with the 4-ways on pretty slow down the 400 and 401 to get back.
I can well imagine, because that started sloshing. There's nothing you could do.
Oh no, it was a terrifying drive. I just remember getting like 5 minutes into it and I was like, I've made a poor decision.
Derek's curious, how many times have you driven the cool ship full?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at brewing notes for that.
Yeah.
We didn't have too many cool ships this year. I think we just did 1, 2, 3, 4. So not a huge year for spontaneous production. We were cramming a lot out our first 2 years. So now we've got a nice library going.
Where are you typically driving it to? Sorry, Bill, I'm interrupting a lot tonight. Must be the
areas that we think have sort of their own terroir. So Muskoka was one of them, being that, you know, when I think about Muskoka, I get my own, you know, childhood memories from it, you know, wild blueberries, cranberries, yada, yada, yada. So Muskoka's one. We didn't get to do it this year, but we're hoping this fall we'll be able to go up to Trail Estates, where we get a lot of our grapes from, park the cool ship out in their vineyard overnight. Eventually we want to try and find a stone fruit farmer down in Niagara, do some stuff there. But yeah, we've just gone sort of out and about, because apparently the industrial area of Cambridge makes great spontaneous beer. So I assume that areas that are a little more natural will make great beer too.
You are making a point. It's like, wow, you are in the middle of an industrial section.
Well, when you think about it, like the famous lambic brewers, there are some that are, you know, out in the boonies, beautiful fields, like Dre-Fontaine, and their big facility is just gorgeous to sit at. But then you go to a place like Cantillon, and it's literally in the heart of Brussels. Like, it's about as industrial as you can get. And there's no fresh air coming in there, let me tell you.
No.
And they make phenomenal beer. So I'm like, okay, if they're doing it and they're in an industrial area, why shouldn't we try it in our industrial area? And it works pretty well. Sometimes beer takes a month to start fermenting. Other times it's like the next day it's very happy. Couldn't tell you what the difference is, but we clean all the barrels the same way, fill with boiling and leave them overnight.
Yeah. So I'm curious, driving the cool ship like that, would that have been okay with the yeast, or
It fermented fine.
it fermented fine? Okay, no, I
I'm not-
know there would have been a lot of movement, which is not necessarily what yeast likes all the time.
Yeah, I mean, at that stage, there probably isn't that much yeast in there to begin with, or at least that's
Okay.
my assumption. Like it's just enough to kind of start. It took like a week still for fermentation to really get going once it got transferred to the barrel.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fine. I don't think anything bad happened. It did smell like literal shit, but that's never like if you're ever at a brewery during spontaneous season, do not ask to go and smell the barrels. They are disgusting. It is, they go from like this like smells like sewage, now it smells kind of like a Hefeweiss, and then oh, there's the funk that we're looking for. But the first like 3 to 4 weeks are just horrible.
So one of my good friends in the wine industry has 5,000 liter open fermentation tanks to do that.
That's kind of big.
And no, you do not want to even be near them in the first couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, and I mean wine is pretty sulfury as well. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I helped him out on the first one, and it was like, oh wow, this is not where I want to be.
yeah, jobs to not do when you're hungover. That it's a pretty potent aroma.
Yeah, Matt, I want to thank you for sharing your stories and giving us the gift of your time tonight. We all truly appreciate it. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Always happy to come out. It's great to see passion kind of in this hobby. It's what got me started in it, and it's great to see that people are interested to hear this weirdo ramble every so often, me being the weirdo.
I don't think any of us feel that way. We love the passion and we love the geekiness of the information, because we're all curious about how and where our beer comes from.